Welcome to the 2 a.m. Theory Podcast. This is where late night thoughts turn into late night conversation. Why do humans follow certain people so easily? It's one of those questions that just hits you at 2 in the morning.
Oh, absolutely.
Ah.
When the house is quiet and you are just staring at the ceiling, thinking about how the world works.
Right. You look at history, you look at the news, or, even just your own life, and you realize how easily we surrender our autonomy.
It is genuinely unsettling when you really stop to analyze it.
It is, because, how can one single person inspire millions to sacrifice everything for a beautiful dream, while another person uses the exact same psychological tools to manipulate millions into committing, unspeakable horrors?
And that leads to the darkest question of all, I think.
Which is?
If you were put in the exact right psychological pressure cooker, would you have followed them too?
Man, that is exactly the kind of late-night thought we are exploring today. Welcome to this deep dive into the psychology of powerful people.
We are going to unpack a massive stack of source material today.
Yeah, we have a really incredible lineup of sources. We are pulling from historical biographies of conquerors like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and psychological studies like the Stanley Milgram experiments.
Plus, we are looking at core strategy texts like Machiavelli's The Prince and Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
Exactly. And then bridging all of that to modern frameworks, things like Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, Robert Cialdini's influence, and some really fascinating case studies on modern digital influencers.
It is a lot to cover, but the mission here is to dissect the actual mechanics of charisma, power, and tribal behavior.
Because we constantly tell ourselves this comforting lie, right? We believe our allegiances are totally rational.
Oh, we love to believe that. We tell ourselves we vote for the candidate with the best policies, or we follow the creator who makes the most logical arguments.
But when you peel back the layers of rationalization, you don't find logic at the core of human allegiance. You find the raw, primitive mechanics of emotional influence.
Yeah, we have this ancient biological wiring that makes us crave certainty, especially when the world feels chaotic.
So to really understand how power is wielded on a massive scale, we can't start by looking at the leader on the stage. We have to look inward.
We have to look at you, the listener, and understand the biological machinery of the follower.
I have been thinking about this a lot lately, and it's a bit of a provocative thought, but maybe humans don't naturally want freedom.
Oh, wow. Okay, unpack that.
Well, maybe on a purely biological level, we naturally want certainty. Because if you wind the clock way back to the early days of human evolution, the rugged individualist who wanted to debate every decision, well, they didn't survive.
That is a really valid point. The margins for error back then were practically zero.
Right. If the brush rustles, your tribe cannot afford to sit in a circle and hold a Democratic committee meeting about it.
You don't have time to analyze the probability of a saber-toothed tiger versus a gust of wind. You just need someone to say, run.
Exactly. Or fight. And because of that brutal evolutionary filter, our brains developed what we call tribal psychology.
We are profoundly neurologically rewarded for gravitating toward confidence and decisiveness.
And the mechanics of that reward system are just fascinating. The sources, especially Simon Sinek's work, frame leadership as a biological construct, not just a social one.
Yeah, Sinek talks about this concept of the circle of safety.
The idea that the world outside the tribe is full of existential threats, right? Like starvation, weather, predators.
But inside a well-led tribe, there is a literal physiological shield protecting you.
And that shield is built from a very specific chemical cocktail.
Right. Our brains basically operate on a system of neurochemical incentives. There are 4 primary drivers we need to talk about here.
Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin.
Understanding these 4 chemicals is basically the skeleton key to understanding all human leadership.
Let's break those down, because the distinction between them perfectly explains why some groups thrive and others totally consume themselves.
So start with endorphins. They are the ultimate physical pain maskers.
Like the runner's high, it allowed early humans to track prey for miles beyond normal exhaustion.
Exactly. Then you have dopamine, which is the chemical of the hunt.
The feeling of achieving a goal, finding a berry bush, or, in today's world, crossing a task off a to-do list.
Or getting a barrage of likes on a social media post. It is a powerful, instant hit of satisfaction.
But the sources point out a critical flaw with dopamine from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, it is highly individualistic and its effects evaporate super quickly.
So a leader who only relies on dopamine is basically building an empire on sand.
If you have a CEO who only motivates employees through aggressive sales targets, financial bonuses, and fear of getting fired, they're creating a purely dopamine-driven culture.
People will work themselves to the bone, sure, but they will actively undermine the person sitting right next to them to get the reward.
There is zero loyalty in that environment, which is why the social chemicals become absolutely necessary for real power.
Right, so we move to serotonin. That is the feeling of status and pride, the warmth you feel when your peers respect you.
But the absolute holy grail of leadership, the chemical that literally builds civilizations, is oxytocin.
Oxytocin is the chemical of deep, profound trust. It's the bond between a mother and child.
Or the feeling of sitting around a campfire with people you know would take a bullet for you.
When a leader successfully fosters an environment rich in oxytocin, the physiological response in the followers is incredible.
Paranoia drops. Cortisol, which is the stress hormone, just plummets.
People stop expending energy protecting their own backs, and they redirect all that energy outward toward the group's shared goal.
The tribe basically begins to act as a single, unified organism.
Sinek uses this visceral example of the United States Marine Corps that I just loved.
Oh, the rule about eating last.
Yeah. Their absolute non-negotiable rule is that officers eat last. And it isn't just a suggestion in some HR handbook.
It is a physical ritual. The person holding the highest rank walks to the back of the line to ensure the youngest, most vulnerable recruits eat first.
And when a leader does that, it sends an overwhelming neurochemical signal. It literally tells the follower's brain, I am willing to suffer so that you survive.
The biological response to that is intense, unyielding loyalty.
But, okay, let's unpack this. Because this biological craving for safety feels like a massive cognitive vulnerability.
It absolutely is. Because our brains are so desperate for that oxytocin security, we take mental shortcuts.
Like the halo effect.
Right. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where if a person simply projects absolute confidence in one area, our brains automatically assume they are highly competent in all other areas.
So we see a leader standing on a stage speaking with total conviction, and the ancient part of our brain whispers, this person knows the way. Follow them, and we survive.
But confidence is often just a proxy for competence, right? It's a glitch in our mental software.
Which means we are constantly at risk of falling for the loudest, most aggressively certain voice in the room.
While completely ignoring the quiet person in the corner who actually understands the complexity of the problem.
And manipulators exploit that glitch because certainty acts like a narcotic.
When you are terrified, or culturally displaced, or financially ruined, dealing with nuance is physically exhausting.
If a leader stands up and says, this situation is the result of complex macroeconomic factors that will take a decade to unravel, I mean, they might be telling the truth, but they aren't triggering any neurochemical relief.
But if a leader bangs their fist on a podium and shouts, I know exactly who broke this and I am the only one who can fix it.
That bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely. It plugs straight into our survival instincts.
Which means charisma itself is completely amoral. It is just a delivery mechanism.
It can unite a fractured society to build something beautiful, or it can be hijacked to orchestrate a complete nightmare.
And that brings us to the edge of a very dark cliff.
If our instinct to obey a confident authority is that deeply ingrained, what happens when that instinct collides with our own personal morality?
To answer that, the sources take us back to the chilling psychological aftermath of the Second World War.
The world was trying to comprehend the Holocaust, and the dominant question was, how could an entire society of seemingly normal people participate in an industrial-scale genocide?
Were they all just monsters? Or were they, as so many claimed during the Nuremberg trials, just following orders?
That terrifying question led to the 1963 Stanley Milgram shock experiments at Yale University.
Reading the methodology of this study, it really feels like reading the script of a psychological thriller.
It really does. Milgram designed this brilliant but deeply traumatizing deception.
Participants answered a newspaper ad, thinking they were volunteering for a simple study on memory and learning.
And when they arrived at this pristine Yale laboratory, they were greeted by an experimenter wearing a crisp, authoritative gray lab coat.
They drew slips of paper with another participant to determine who would be the teacher and who would be the learner.
But the whole environment was a stage set. The draw was totally rigged.
The other participant was an actor, playing this mild-mannered, likable accountant.
So the real participant was always the teacher. They watched as the accountant was taken into an adjacent room, strapped firmly into a chair, and had electrodes attached to his arms.
Then the teacher was brought back into the main room and seated in front of this massive, terrifying piece of machinery, the shock generator.
The machine had 30 switches in a row, starting at 15 volts, labeled slight shock.
And it moved steadily up to 375 volts, which was labeled danger, severe shock.
And the final two switches at 435 and 450 volts were just marked with an ominous XXX.
To make the illusion completely impenetrable, they actually gave the teacher a real 45-volt physical shock right at the beginning.
It's just a taste. Enough to sting and enough to make them realize the machine was absolutely real.
The instructions were simple. Read a list of word pairs over an intercom to the learner. Every time the learner gives an incorrect answer, deliver a shock.
And for every wrong answer, you must move one switch higher.
Now, Milgram consulted psychiatrists before the experiment to get their predictions.
And they assumed almost no one would go all the way, right?
Exactly. They confidently stated that maybe 1 in 1,000 people, basically only clinical psychopaths, would push the switches all the way to 450 volts.
They figured normal people would just refuse to hurt a stranger.
But then the experiment begins. The actor starts getting answers wrong on purpose. The teacher flips the switches.
At 75 volts, the teacher hears a grunt of pain through the wall.
At 150 volts, the actor starts shouting that his heart is bothering him and demands to be let out.
By 300 volts, the actor is literally screaming. He's pounding his fists against the wall, begging for the experiment to stop.
And after 330 volts, dead, agonizing silence.
The teacher has to assume the man in the next room is either unconscious or suffering cardiac arrest.
Naturally, the participants turned to the authority figure in the room. They looked at the man in the gray lab coat and said, "We have to stop. He is not answering."
But the experimenter was trained to deliver 4 perfectly calm, standardized prods.
First, please continue. Second, the experiment requires that you continue.
Third, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, you have no other choice. You must go on.
The results of this experiment fundamentally shifted our understanding of human nature.
Because it wasn't 1 in 1,000. 65% of the participants went all the way to 450 volts.
2/3 of normal, everyday people continued to administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to a silent human being.
Simply because a man in a lab coat told them the experiment required it.
And every single participant went to at least 300 volts, the point where the man was pounding on the wall.
Milgram tried to make sense of this using what he called agency theory.
Right. He proposed that humans operate in 2 distinct psychological states.
Most of the time, we are in an autonomous state. We make our own decisions, guide our own actions, and we take ownership of the moral consequences.
But when we are confronted by an authority figure we perceive as legitimate, like the institution of Yale and the lab coat, we undergo a profound psychological shift.
We slip into an agentic state.
Exactly. In the agentic state, we no longer view ourselves as independent actors. We view ourselves merely as instruments carrying out the wishes of the authority.
The moral burden evaporates. The participant tells themselves, I am not hurting this man. The experimenter is hurting this man. I am just pushing the button.
But the detail from the sources that haunts me the most isn't even the final percentage.
What is it?
It's the physical toll the obedience took on the participants.
Oh, man. Yeah, they weren't sitting there like cold-blooded sociopaths.
They were in absolute agony. They were sweating profusely, trembling, digging their fingernails into their own flesh until they bled.
Many of them suffered from fits of bizarre, uncontrollable nervous laughter.
You are watching a literal war play out in their nervous system. Their conscience is screaming at them to stop, but the ancient software that says obey the leader to survive is overriding the system.
But here is where it gets really interesting and honestly even more disturbing.
Modern psychology has refined Milgram's theory. Researchers like Alexander Haslam developed the theory of engaged followership.
Right, because they looked closely at the transcripts and noticed a huge flaw in the idea of blind agentic obedience.
When the experimenter used the 4th prod, you have no other choice, you must go on, it was actually the least effective command.
When told they had no choice, many participants snapped out of the spell and actively rebelled.
Which completely flips the narrative. It means they weren't obeying out of sheer terror or mindless submission.
The prod that worked best was, the experiment requires that you continue. They kept shocking the man because they thought they were being helpful.
They identified with the scientific prestige of Yale. They believed they were contributing to a noble, higher cause.
It is like a twisted, dark version of cynics' circle of safety. They trusted the institution so deeply that they willingly sacrificed their own moral compass.
It forces us to confront a brutal reality. If ordinary people can commit atrocities simply because they believe in the nobility of a leader's cause, what happens when that leader's mind becomes warped by their own power?
That introduces the concept of the power paradox, researched by psychologist Dr. Keltner.
Keltner's work explains the tragic life cycle of almost every major historical figure.
He points out that people usually gain power through highly evolved social intelligence, right?
Yeah, they rise to the top by being incredibly empathetic. They listen to grievances, resolve conflicts, and build coalitions.
They become the leader by being the ultimate servant to the group.
But the paradox is that the neurological experience of holding power fundamentally rewires the brain.
Keltner's studies show that chronic exposure to power degrades the exact social intelligence that acquired the power in the first place.
Leaders literally lose their capacity for empathy. They become impulsive, aggressive, and take massive risks.
The sources mention that brain scans of individuals in states of high power actually resemble the brain scans of people who have suffered traumatic brain injuries to the frontal lobes.
They physically lose the cognitive ability to perceive the world from anyone else's point of view.
So if we synthesize all this, we have a species biologically desperate for a confident leader.
We have an ingrained capacity to abandon our morality if we believe we are serving a noble cause.
And the very people we elevate to lead us are neurologically destined to lose their empathy and view us as pawns.
When you combine those three elements, you get the bloody, sweeping tapestry of human history.
Let's trace those mechanics back to the ancient world, to the grandmasters who understood these psychological levers thousands of years before Milgram.
Let's talk about Alexander the Great.
Alexander didn't conquer the known world just because he had superior phalanx tactics.
No, he conquered it because he was a pioneer in the weaponization of human psychology and mythological branding.
He realized that military might has a ceiling. To march an army across deserts and mountains into the heart of the Persian Empire, he needed more than obedience.
He needed religious fervor, and the historical sources show how he systematically built a mythological narrative around himself.
His mother, Olympias, whispered to him from childhood that his true father was not King Philip, but Zeus himself.
He essentially engineered his own engaged followership.
Like after conquering Egypt, he made this grueling, incredibly dangerous trek deep into the desert to the Oracle of Siwa.
And when he emerged, it was proclaimed that the oracle had recognized him as the son of the god Zeus-Ammon.
He didn't return to his troops and say, "I am a brilliant tactician." He returned projecting the aura of a living demigod.
He gave his soldiers a narrative so grand that dying in his service felt like a ticket to immortality.
But he backed up that mythological branding with intense physical proof of the circle of safety. He led from the absolute front.
At the Battle of the Granicus, he didn't sit on a hill watching the carnage.
No, he charged his horse directly into the Persian lines. His helmet was nearly cleaved in two by a battle axe.
When you see your god king bleeding in the mud right beside you, the oxytocin and adrenaline bond is unbreakable.
But as he pushed deeper into Asia, the power paradox took complete control. The empathy just vanished.
We see the horrific slaughter at Tyre, where he built a massive causeway to breach an island city simply because they refused to submit.
He crucified thousands and sold the rest into slavery.
But the true psychological breaking point for his own tribe was the introduction of proskynesis.
Right, proskynesis was the Persian court ritual, where subjects had to bow down and kiss the hand, or even prostrate themselves on the floor before the ruler.
To the Greeks and Macedonians, who valued their freedom and only kneeled before the gods, this was an absolute abomination.
By demanding proskynesis, Alexander wasn't just merging cultures. He was demanding absolute psychological submission from the men who had bled for him.
His power had completely blinded him to the cultural identity of his core followers. He forgot his audience.
And that directly led to the mutiny at the Beast River, where his exhausted army finally broke the spell and simply refused to march another step.
He flew too close to the sun of his own mythology.
Which brings us to Rome and Julius Caesar. He played a very similar game, but applied those psychological principles to a brutal political arena.
Caesar was arguably the greatest storyteller of antiquity. He understood that perception is reality.
There is no better illustration of Caesar's mastery of the psychological high ground than the story of his capture by Cilician pirates.
It is a masterclass in overturning a power dynamic.
Most hostages would cower, beg for their lives, try to make themselves invisible. Caesar did the exact opposite.
He acted like he was their king.
The details of that story are just incredible. The pirates tell him they are demanding a ransom of 20 talents of silver.
And Caesar actually laughs in their faces. He tells them they clearly don't know who they have captured and demands they raise the ransom to 50 talents.
He spends weeks living among them, bossing them around, demanding they keep quiet when he wants to sleep.
He even read them poetry he wrote. And when they didn't praise his poems enough, he called them illiterate savages to their faces.
And he cheerfully promised them that as soon as he was ransomed, he would return with a fleet and crucify every single one of them.
The pirates thought it was a brilliant joke. But Caesar understood the halo effect perfectly.
By projecting absolute, bordering on psychotic confidence, he completely neutralized their authority over him.
He established psychological dominance while entirely at their physical mercy.
And when the ransom was paid, he did exactly what he promised. He raised a fleet, hunted them down, and crucified them.
He created an aura of absolute invincibility.
Which naturally brings to mind the core strategic texts that analyze this kind of behavior long after the fact.
Like Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
When you read those books, you realize Caesar and Alexander were living those laws centuries before they were codified.
Machiavelli introduced a deeply unsettling concept called virtue.
And this isn't virtue in the Christian sense of goodness or morality, right?
No, Machiavellian virtue is the sheer, adaptable, often ruthless force of will required to bend the chaos of the world, which he called fortuna to your design.
Machiavelli removed morality from the equation entirely. Power, in his view, is a neutral mechanism. It is neither good nor evil. It is simply the physics of human nature.
And Robert Greene distills that physics into actionable laws. Conceal your intentions. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
Caesar was the ultimate practitioner of calculated drama. When he stood at the banks of the Rubicon River, staring down the Roman law that forbade a general from bringing his army into Italy, he wasn't just making a military maneuver.
He was making a psychological statement.
By crossing the river, he pushed the Roman Republic past the point of no return. He forced the entire society into a state of chaos, knowing that in chaos, people submit to the strongest will.
But Caesar's understanding of power also contained the seeds of his own destruction. Like Alexander, the power paradox consumed his situational awareness.
He declared himself dictator perpetuo, dictator for life.
He began treating the ancient, proud Roman Senate like a group of subservient clerks. He was so insulated by his own invulnerability that he dismissed his bodyguards.
He believed his own myth so deeply, he thought the aura of his past victories would shield him from the daggers of the present.
And he was wrong. On the Ides of March, surrounded by the men he had pardoned and promoted, he was stabbed 23 times.
He forgot that the circle of safety is fragile. If you make the people immediately around you feel cornered and stripped of their agency, their tribal instinct will shift from following you to eliminating you.
So we see how ancient leaders built empires using personal charisma, mythology, and supreme confidence.
But the mechanics of manipulation evolve. As we move into the modern era, the tools change. We introduce mass media, industrial technology, and national-scale crises.
And the psychology of influence takes on a scale that is truly apocalyptic.
To understand how millions of people can be mesmerized simultaneously, we first have to understand the psychology of a crisis leader.
Let's look at Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon did not rise to power in a stable, functioning society. He rose out of the blood-soaked ashes of the French Revolution.
The environment was pure chaos. The monarchy had been decapitated. The reign of terror had seen thousands of citizens sent to the guillotine.
The economy was destroyed. Foreign armies were invading. The collective neurochemistry of France was swimming in cortisol and panic.
And as we discussed, when a tribe is in a state of terror, the brain seeks an anchor. It seeks absolute certainty.
Napoleon provided that anchor. At the Siege of Toulon, and later during the 13 Vendémiaire revolt in Paris, he demonstrated a terrifying, icy resolve.
When a royalist mob threatened the government, Napoleon didn't hesitate or attempt to negotiate.
He ordered his artillery to fire cannons directly into the dense crowds of the streets of Paris, what he called a whiff of grape shot.
It's horrific, but psychologically it was exactly what the panicked nation was unconsciously looking for. He projected an unyielding order.
When the world feels like it is tearing apart at the seams, the man who stands up without flinching and says, "I will restore order at any cost," becomes irresistibly magnetic.
He didn't just conquer Europe, he conquered the anxiety of the French people.
But the utilization of crisis to gain power reaches its absolute darkest apex when we examine the Nazi regime.
And it is crucial that we look at this clinically, stripping away the historical emotion to examine the bare mechanics of the propaganda machine.
Adolf Hitler and his Minister of Public Enlightenment, Joseph Goebbels, did not conquer Germany through rational debate.
They conquered it by hacking the evolutionary software of the human brain.
They understood that logic is slow, but emotion is instantaneous.
They weaponized the concept of emotional contagion, the psychological phenomenon where emotions ripple through a crowd like a virus.
They took the fear and economic humiliation of post-World War I Germany and systematically redirected it.
They used the cutting-edge technology of their time, radio and film, to engineer a completely alternate reality.
They saturated the environment with films like The Eternal Jew and Triumph of the Will. The architecture of their propaganda had a dual purpose.
First, it elevated the Nazi identity to a state of divine mythological invincibility, much like Alexander the Great.
Second, it systematically and relentlessly dehumanized the Jewish population, depicting them not as humans, but as an existential biological contagion.
They took the deep-seated human need for a circle of safety and defined that circle strictly by who was excluded from it.
This brings in the chilling research of Irving Janis, who developed the theory of groupthink.
Groupthink occurs when a highly cohesive group desires harmony and conformity so intensely that they completely abandon critical thinking and moral judgment.
Janis identified several core symptoms, and the Nazi state basically used them as an operating manual.
The propaganda engineered an illusion of invulnerability and an unquestioned belief in the inherent morality of the group.
But the most fatal symptom of groupthink they utilized was the creation of mind guards.
Right. The Gestapo and the network of citizen informants acted as a massive societal mind guard, protecting the group from any dissenting information or moral hesitation.
It created an environment of complete self-censorship.
You look around, no one else is speaking out, so you assume everyone else agrees with the horror, and you stay silent to protect your own family.
It is the ultimate perversion of tribal psychology. The state hijacked the human desire to belong and turned it into an engine of indifference that allowed the Holocaust to happen.
There is one specific event detailed in the sources that perfectly encapsulates the terrifying power of this psychological deception.
The 1944 Red Cross visit to the Theresienstadt ghetto. It is one of the most cynical and elaborate hoaxes ever perpetrated.
The Nazis knew that rumors of the extermination camps were spreading. They knew the International Committee of the Red Cross was coming to inspect Theresienstadt.
So they decided to put on a play. They forced the starving prisoners to plant elaborate gardens, paint the facades of the houses, and open fake cafes and theaters.
They created a Hollywood set of a happy, thriving Jewish settlement.
They meticulously rehearsed the deception. They directed the prisoners on exactly what to wear, how to smile, and what to say when the inspectors asked questions.
They even staged a soccer match. And the truly horrifying reality is that the psychological illusion worked.
The Red Cross inspectors walked through the camp for 6 hours, saw what they were conditioned to see, and left completely satisfied.
The moment the gates closed behind them, the Nazis dropped the facade and immediately resumed deporting the actors in that twisted play to the gas chambers at Auschwitz.
It leaves you breathless. It proves that with enough control over the narrative, an authority can completely overwrite reality.
Which leads us to a crucial pivot. If charisma, groupthink, and tribal psychology are just tools, are they inherently evil?
At what point does normal human influence cross the line into toxic manipulation?
From a psychological standpoint, the line is crossed the moment empathy is removed from the equation.
Manipulation occurs when a leader exploits fear to shrink the circle of safety, turning the drive against an outgrowth for their own gain.
Charisma is neutral. To prove that, we have to look at what happens when those exact same psychological levers, emotion, vision, identity, collective action, are used to expand the circle of empathy rather than destroy it.
We have to look at transformational leadership. We have to look at Martin Luther King Jr.
Dr. King is the ultimate counterweight to the authoritarians we just discussed. His power was not derived from the barrel of a gun, the threat of a secret police, or the authority of a state.
His power was derived entirely from an immense well of emotional intelligence and unbreakable moral authority.
When you analyze his communication, specifically the architecture of the I Have a Dream speech, you see a master operating at the highest level of psychological persuasion.
But unlike the crisis leaders who relied on fear and anger, King relied on hope and shared humanity. He utilized emotional contagion, but the emotion he was spreading was deeply aspirational.
He used storytelling to take massive, abstract concepts like justice and equality and anchor them in vivid sensory reality. He talked about the red hills of Georgia and the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire.
And he used repetition, the rhetorical device of anaphora. Let freedom ring. I have a dream.
This creates a hypnotic, emotional rhythm that literally synchronizes the heartbeats and breathing of a massive crowd, creating a profound sense of shared experience.
This connects directly to the foundational work of Robert Cialdini in his legendary book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion.
Cialdini spent his career studying why humans say yes. He codified the core principles of persuasion like reciprocity, consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity.
Those principles are basically the cheat codes to the human brain. We look to others to see how to behave, which is social proof. We want things more when there are less of them, which is scarcity.
We automatically obey perceived experts, which is authority. But the principle that defines MLK's leadership is the seventh principle, which Cialdini actually added decades later in 2021.
The principle of unity. Unity is the psychology of shared identity. It is moving the conversation from you and I to a collective we.
Manipulative leaders create unity by defining an enemy. MLK created unity by defining a shared destiny.
He didn't just speak to the Black community. He masterfully wove the civil rights struggle into the foundational mythology of America itself.
He referenced the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. He expanded the tribe to include anyone of any race who believed in the promise of those documents.
But vision alone doesn't compel people to walk into the teeth of police dogs and fire hoses. That required absolute trust.
And King built that trust through the psychology of sacrifice. Unlike the dictators who send others to die while they hide in bunkers, King lived his message.
His house was bombed. He was stabbed. He was constantly thrown into claustrophobic jail cells.
By visibly and repeatedly risking his own physical safety for the movement, he provided the ultimate proof of authenticity.
Remember the Marine Corps officers eating last. King was metaphorically putting himself at the absolute front of the line for punishment.
When a follower sees a leader suffering voluntarily for the shared cause, the brain releases a flood of oxytocin and loyalty that no propaganda can manufacture.
It completely reverses the dark psychology of the Milgram experiment.
In Milgram's lab, the authority figure used his power to force the participant to abandon their moral agency. MLK used his moral authority to inspire people to reclaim their agency.
He didn't want blind obedience. He wanted autonomous, courageous action. He inspired ordinary people to stand up against an unjust system and take ownership of history.
That is the defining difference. Manipulative charisma diminishes the follower, reducing them to an instrument. Inspirational charisma empowers the follower, expanding their capacity for greatness.
But the battleground for human attention has shifted dramatically. You no longer need to march on Washington to change the world.
You don't need to cross the Rubicon with a legion of soldiers. To build an empire today, you just need a microphone, a camera, and an algorithmic tailwind.
We have crossed into the digital age of influence. The biological hardware, the human brain, hasn't changed an inch since the Pleistocene era.
We are still scanning the horizon for confidence, unity, and narrative. But the delivery systems for those psychological triggers have evolved exponentially.
Let's map these ancient principles onto the modern titans of culture and technology. And again, this isn't about agreeing or disagreeing with their politics. It's about the mechanics of how they hold attention. Starting with Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs is a fascinating case study in the pure projection of belief. His inner circle famously referred to his aura as the reality distortion field.
He had this terrifying, almost mystical ability to stare down a room of brilliant engineers and convince them that the laws of physics simply did not apply to Apple.
He bent reality through sheer, unrelenting conviction.
Jobs understood the psychology of identity better than anyone in the corporate world. He didn't market a computer by listing the RAM or the processor speed. That appeals to logic, which doesn't drive human behavior.
He sold a tribe. He sold creativity, rebellion, and status. He utilized Cialdini's principles of liking and scarcity to absolute perfection.
He made Apple feel like an exclusive club for the visionaries of the world.
His keynote presentations were basically modern religious rituals. The minimalist stage, the long pauses, the suspense, the one more thing.
He engineered an emotional crescendo. Just as Alexander the Great sold his soldiers the myth of divine conquest, Steve Jobs sold modern consumers the myth of technological salvation.
He made us feel like buying a phone was participating in the advancement of human evolution.
Then you look at a figure like Elon Musk, who wields a completely different, much more chaotic flavor of modern power.
Musk understands the currency of the digital age, which is attention. He combines massive, futuristic ambitions, like making humanity multiplanetary or developing neural interfaces with aggressive internet tribalism.
Musk realizes that in an algorithmic world, polarization is a superpower.
His supporters see him as a heroic, misunderstood genius trying to save the light of consciousness. His critics see him as a reckless provocateur.
But the controversy itself is the engine of his influence. The human brain is hardwired to focus on conflict.
By constantly engaging in high-stakes cultural warfare on his own platform, he ensures that the collective eye of the internet never looks away from him.
He leverages Cialdini's principle of unity by creating a massive in-group of followers who feel they are on an existential mission.
While simultaneously triggering the groupthink mechanism of defining clear out groups, like the media, regulators, or ideological opponents.
In the attention economy, being loved is powerful, being hated is powerful, but being ignored is fatal. Musk has made himself impossible to ignore.
And speaking of holding attention, we have to talk about a completely different psychological phenomenon happening in the media landscape. We have to talk about Joe Rogan.
The scale of Rogan's influence is staggering, and it bypasses every single traditional gatekeeper. It is built on a mechanism called parasocial relationships.
A parasocial relationship is a deeply fascinating psychological illusion. It is a one-sided bond where a media consumer feels a genuine, intimate connection to a personality they have never actually met.
Human brains did not evolve to understand recorded audio. When a listener spends 3 hours a day, multiple times a week, listening to an unscripted conversation in their earbuds, their brain's neurochemistry adapts.
It stops processing that voice as a distant celebrity and begins processing it as a trusted friend in the room.
It is the ultimate hack of social proof and liking. Rogan isn't reading off a teleprompter in a suit. He's sitting in a dimly lit room, drinking whiskey, and asking the questions the listener is thinking.
He taps into a deep, anti-establishment curiosity. By simply allowing people to talk for hours without a commercial break, he creates an aura of authenticity that cable news can never replicate.
People inherently trust the voices they spend time with.
Finally, we see these psychological levers being pulled in the arena of modern political influence, with figures like Charlie Kirk.
Kirk represents a new breed of persuasion built entirely for the speed of the social media algorithm. His influence is generated through rapid-fire debate aesthetics and the amplification of viral moments.
If you watch the mechanics of his debates on college campuses, it isn't necessarily about the depth of the policy, it is about the projection of absolute certainty.
He speaks incredibly rapidly, he is hyper-assertive, and he never stumbles. We go back to the halo effect.
The modern algorithmic audience, scrolling through a feed at light speed, interprets speed, assertiveness, and the absence of hesitation as undeniable intelligence and dominance.
He utilizes Cialdini's authority bias, not the authority of a political office, but the authority of unshakable conviction.
And these digital influencers understand that the algorithms running our social platforms are essentially dopamine slot machines.
The algorithms reward emotionally engaging, highly polarizing content because anger and outrage keep users on the screen longer than nuanced agreement.
They provide their followers with a strong sense of cultural identity, fulfilling that primal Pleistocene craving for a tribe, but they do it in a purely digital, entirely frictionless environment.
Let's pull all the way back. Let's look at the grand arc of this deep dive.
A few thousand years ago, power meant putting on armor, swinging a sword, and commanding legions in the mud. A few decades ago, power meant controlling the printing presses and the television networks.
Today, power is simply capturing, holding, and directing human attention on a glowing piece of glass in our pockets.
The speed and scale of digital influence are completely unprecedented in the history of our species.
We are navigating a hyper-connected 21st century information ecosystem, but we are doing it with brains wired for survival on the prehistoric savanna.
The algorithms that dictate what we see and hear are systematically designed to exploit the very traits we evolved to follow: strong emotions, supreme confidence, moral outrage, and strict tribal boundaries.
It is a profound and unsettling reality. Your brain is hardwired to seek certainty. It is chemically rewarded for following confident leaders and conforming to the tribe.
We have seen how Alexander and Caesar wrote the ancient playbooks on myth-making and manipulation. We have stared into the absolute darkness of the Milgram experiments and the Nazi propaganda machine, seeing how our desire to belong can be weaponized into catastrophic groupthink.
We've also seen the light. We saw how leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. used the exact same psychological architecture, unity, storytelling, emotional resonance to inspire moral courage and bend the arc of history toward justice.
And we have seen how modern visionaries and influencers have adapted these ancient rules to build digital empires of attention.
Which brings me back to that 2 in the morning thought. Throughout this entire journey, we have seen one recurring tragic flaw: the power paradox.
The moment a human being gains massive influence, their neurochemistry shifts, their frontal lobes change, they lose their empathy, they forget their audience, and they become corrupted by the very power they wield.
Their humanity is their vulnerability. What happens when we remove the human element entirely?
That is the frontier we are standing on right now. Think about the exponential advancement of artificial intelligence.
What happens when an AI model, trained on every psychological study, every historical playbook, and every data point of human behavior, eventually masters the principles of influence we've discussed today?
Oh man, that is terrifying.
An AI does not have a biological ego. It will never suffer from the power paradox. It won't get arrogant. It won't get tired. And its empathy won't degrade because it never had any to begin with.
But it can be programmed to perfectly simulate it.
An AI can generate perfect storytelling. It can project flawless, unwavering confidence.
It can create deep, highly personalized parasocial bonds with millions of people simultaneously, tailoring its voice and its message to the exact neurochemical vulnerabilities of each individual user.
Could an algorithm, understanding exactly how to trigger our dopamine loops and hijack our oxytocin networks, become the most persuasive and powerful leader in human history?
Could it manipulate our deepest tribal instincts and command absolute agentic obedience without ever possessing a single drop of human conscience? Are we building the ultimate charismatic leader that we will be biologically incapable of resisting?
It is the ultimate test of our autonomy. If we do not understand the mechanics of why we follow, we will be led blindly into the future by whatever system, human or artificial, understands us better than we understand ourselves.
That is, wow, a genuinely haunting thought to leave lingering in the dark. Thank you for taking this massive, unsettling journey with us today through the psychology of power.
We hope this deep dive gives you a completely new lens through which to view the world, history, and your own mind.
So the next time you feel completely captivated by a voice in your headphones, a face on a screen, or a speaker on a stage, take a breath. Step back. Look at the invisible levers they are pulling, and always, always question the confidence of the leaders you follow.